Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern. Today is Tuesday, and the patch notes for patch 10.15 have been posted, and that means it's time for another patch note rundown. As always, I'll be going through the biggest changes in this week's patch, and letting you guys know what you can be looking forward to in the coming weeks. 10.15 has a bunch of really interesting changes. It is buffing up Swain, which I'm really excited about, and it's also trying to make some targeted changes to affect the pro play scene, especially in regards to nerfing down some of the more dominant picks and getting some champions that have been edge cases for a while into the meta. We'll talk about all this and more down below, but let's go ahead and get started because there is a lot for me to talk about today. Now, real quick touch on ranked flex now is no longer banded by skill rank, so if you're challenger, you can play with your bronze buddies and vice versa. Now, this means that ranked flex will be a little bit more of a clusterfuck than it used to be, but it's not that big of a deal because it really wasn't treated very seriously by the community in the first place, so it does give them the ability to queue up and practice for a clash, especially if you've got a very broad range of skills, so that should be a nice welcome addition. Lillia, the Bashful Bloom, is going to be on this patch. I think she's going to be quite strong on release once people figure her out. I think she's going to feed a lot of your games when she first comes out. We'll kind of see how she does, but suffice it to say, I'm excited to see her on the Rift and to play her. Aphelios is on the nerf train this week. Now, his nerfs are not that significant on this patch. Crescendum's Sentry, the activation radius is down to 500 from 575, and the activation time has been increased very slightly. What this means is that the Sentry won't zone out as much space as it used to, and it has slightly more of an activation time, so Aphelios won't be able to throw it down and immediately get value out of it like he can right now. Now, this is not that big of a nerf, in all honesty. The only other nerf, well, quote-unquote nerf he received was some bug fixing and some changes to how Infernum interacts with Runaan's Hurricane, so it's slightly less silly, and there's a little bit less damage. But realistically, I don't think this does very much to move the needle on Aphelios' balance at all. He's slightly weaker, yes, but until Riot address some of his more degenerate interactions, I don't think this will have any effect at all on his presence in pro play or on generally on his balance. Caitlyn is getting some spicy buffs on this patch. She now has 64 base AD and 330 movement speed. These are both significant because this means she does more damage in lane with just auto attack harass. That's a little bit of extra damage every time she's able to auto attack you. And the movement speed addresses her relative lack of mobility by letting her walk out of situations she ordinarily wouldn't be able to. So these are some pretty big buffs for Caitlyn. I do think this solidifies her as a very strong early game AD carry. I would love for Riot to have tossed her some nerfs to her scalings to try and compensate for early game dominance by reducing her late game power. That didn't happen, but I do think she's going to be a really strong pick, especially in solo queue environments. Tank Fiddlesticks got a very slight nerf on this patch. Riot are just nerfing the healing he receives from his W on minions. So it means that Tank Fiddlesticks in lane will be slightly more killable because he won't just be able to sustain off of you plus all of the minions, plus having Aftershock going. But it doesn't kill the build by any stretch of the imagination. I think it'll still be a viable alternative, but I do think that Mage Fiddlesticks is more solidified as better than Tank Fiddlesticks with these changes. Gragas is getting some very slight buffs on this patch. These are not big buffs, guys. It's just a very slight bump to the AP ratios on both his W and his R. But as with Sejuani, any buff Gragas receives tends to put him back into professional play as a must-pick champion. So we'll see. Gragas is usually more of a tank jungler in pro play, and these are buffs to Mage Gragas. So it's not that big of a deal in that regard, but I would be watching Gragas very closely over the next couple of weeks to see if he starts cropping up again in professional play, and especially in higher elo. Aurelia is getting some small buffs on this patch. She is gaining more bonus attack speed per stack of her passive. The breakpoints are changing, so at level 1, the attack speed she gets is not changed at all. That's still 8%. But now at level 7, she's gaining up to 60% total attack speed at max stacks, which is a big bump because it used to be 50. And now she's up all the way up to 80% bonus attack speed at level 13, which means that Aurelia actually has a really strong mid-game power spike now, just based off of her passive. It's not a huge deal for lower elos who aren't as good at stacking up her passive and then fighting when it's available, but it is definitely an increase in power for the champion, and it will make her sort of early game to mid game transition a lot smoother. Lee Sin is being nerfed on this patch. I would have liked for Riot to have nerfed some of his damage down, as I think he does kind of a ridiculous amount of damage, especially with his R and his Q, but instead they're opting to nerf Lee Sin's utility and his mobility, and this also doubles as a nerf to his sustain in the jungle as well, because Safeguard's cooldown is up by 2 seconds, he's using it less in the jungle, he's getting fewer casts of Iron Will, so he's taking more damage in the jungle, he's not sustaining as much in the jungle, and he doesn't have as much mobility, so every cast he makes of Safeguard is relevant, as opposed to sort of the current state where he can use it without having to worry about it as much. So this is a very small nerf to Lee Sin, but I'm hoping that the ripple effects of less sustain in the jungle, less tankiness in the jungle, less mobility overall will be enough to knock him down a peg. Ornn is getting nerfed in this patch. His base armor is being reduced by 3. It's an early game nerf, so it is significant. I just dislike this change from the standpoint that Ornn is a tank. He is supposed to be tanky, and they're nerfing his tank stats. And now, this wouldn't necessarily be a problem if he was overly tanky, but the problem I have is that Ornn is good in lane because his ability to fight enemy champions is huge. Ornn does so much damage. He is able to basically trade evenly with bruisers, the guys who are supposed to be building damage, while Ornn is building straight tank. So I think that if Riot really want to remove Ornn as a staple from pro play, they should be looking at removing a lot of his damage as opposed to nerfing his tank stats. He's supposed to be a tank, he should be durable, he shouldn't be doing as much damage, and if you tone back his ability to trade back, he falls in line with all of the other tanks in the game that also don't have a big ability to trade back with their lane opponents. If you think of Maokai or Malphite or even Shen, their ability to trade is not that high. Especially in comparison to someone like Ornn, who gets to be just as tanky as these guys and hyperscale and do more damage than them in lane. So I would have liked to have seen a different nerf for Ornn, especially after the nerfs he received on the last patch, but this is what we got, this is what we'll have to live with. I don't think it reduces Ornn's pick rate in pro play literally at all, but we'll see. Rakan, this is a very small quality of life buff. His passive's cooldown now scales down per level rather than per 2 levels. So it's a very slight buff at later stages of the game, but generally it's just going to make him feel smoother to play, and he'll get more Fey Feathers procs throughout the game. So a little bit more sustain, a little bit more durability for Rakan. Speaking of Shen is in the patch notes, and he's getting a durability buff, which I do like because he is a tank. The shield value on Kai Barrier has been increased at all levels, but the bonus health ratio has been unchanged, so Shen will be slightly more durable, especially whenever he procs his passive at all stages of the game. I do like this. I think it makes him a slightly more palatable pick in pro play, and I think that does mean we might see him a little bit more often, especially whenever Ornn gets banned, because that is a decent flex pick. There's a lot of places you can run him, and if you need a tank, Shen is now looking a little bit more appetizing. On to Skarner with Hooey. These are some spicy changes here. He is really able to chew through some frontline targets now because Crystal Slash has been changed to now do up to 6% of the target's maximum health if you have the bonus empowered damage going on that ability. Now the AD ratio, the AD is down, so he'll be doing less flat damage, but the fact that it's doing percent max health damage means that he will be able to really chew through some tanks and do a bunch of damage to them. So don't sleep on that, especially given that the buff duration is up and the mana cost has been normalized. Actually, the mana cost normalization, that is a nerf. He'll get fewer crystal slashes in general, but it still does more consistent damage than it used to. So definitely look for Skarner to be showing up. I think especially if teams draft really bulky comps, that Skarner will be a very obvious pick to deal with them because he still has all the utility from Impale as well. So big changes for him. Also, Fracture no longer slowing down when it hits minions means that he can just kind of throw this through the wave at somebody and try to go for that stun. So that's another really big change. I would be looking to see teams potentially picking up Skarner because these changes are that impactful. Swain is also getting some spicy changes on this patch. Now, Riot are trying to buff his skilled play in particular, his skilled elite play, because in average play, he's looking relatively okay. He only gets weaker as you go up the ranks. So Riot are generally trying to give him a little bit more battle magey of a feel in order to deal more damage and swap out some of his utility in exchange for this power. Now, let's go ahead and break this down real quick. Moon speed has been decreased, so he's a little bit more vulnerable in lane, a little bit less able to dodge skill shots or to run away from bruisers in the top lane. His passive's cooldown has been normalized to 10 seconds. This is a buff early and nerf late, but it now scales with CDR. This means that if you're building a lot of items that are giving CDR, especially if you're like a support Swain, It's really not that big of a change, but if you generally are building him more damagey, especially with a build like Rod of Ages into Leandry's Torment, you will be feeling this by the mid stages of the game. It also no longer restores mana. So this is a big hit to Swain's sustain, and it's a big hit to his ability to teamfight because he'll get fewer procs of Ravenous Flock unless you are itemizing for it. Death's Hand, the cooldown is down to 3 seconds, which is really nice. He's able to cast that a lot more in team fights, so he feels more like a battle mage. The bolt angle is also now 8 degrees from 10, which means that you'll get hit by more bolts every time you cast this, and so you'll take more damage overall. It also now passes through champions, so if you're bundled up with a Swain right nearby, and he's casting Death's Hand every 3 seconds, or less if he's got CDR, he can be doing a ton of AoE teamfight damage with that ability, plus with his ult ticking. There's a lot of potential here for Swain to do some damage. Vision of Empire is also getting some changes here. It has more than double its regular range at maximum rank. 7,500 is huge. Now, the damage has been tanked to compensate. The mana cost has also been dropped here a little bit, and we'll touch on that in a sec. But so the damage being less means that it's less of a tool for lane. Obviously, Swain before could kind of land an E, pull you back, press W because you're slowed, you're in the middle of the W, you'll take the damage for free. So that as a trading tool is significantly weaker, but as a scouting tool, it's significantly better. It lets Swain influence other lanes. It lets him keep tabs on the jungler more easily. It's a big utility buff in exchange for a slight drop in damage, but that's fine because as we talked about with Death's Hand, he's got damage in spades now. Finally, Never Move. The cooldown has been normalized to 10 seconds, which is a very slight nerf late, but it's generally a straight buff to Swain's early stages of the game. And the mana cost is also down. That mana cost drop and the W mana cost drop, I believe, is to compensate for the fact that he no longer gets mana back from his passive. So in general, Swain will be doing more damage. He has slightly more utility on his W, but his damage is all very low range, so he needs to be getting up in enemies' faces in order to get that damage through. Trying to poke with Vision of Empire won't be nearly as effective as it was before, and it's a less effective version of his combo. He also will run out of mana a lot more quickly because he won't be proccing his passive as often, and he won't be getting mana back from his passive in general. So generally, these are good Swain buffs. I really do like the direction they're taking the champion in. I'll be excited to play with these on the future patch. Thresh is a very small cooldown on his W. Now it being a 16-second cooldown means that he'll have fewer opportunities to pull people out of the fire. He'll still have the ability if he needs it, but it does mean he needs to think a lot more carefully about when and where he uses Dark Passage in order to get the maximum value out of it. Twisted Fate is also getting some nerfs on this patch. The cooldown on pick a card has been increased to 8 seconds, scaling down to 6. Now, this is usually a second max, so it won't get back down to its regular value until level 13, which does hurt his early game ability to shove waves. He'll be getting less mana back, so that means fewer wild cards. He'll be getting fewer red cards, which also helps him shove the wave. In a gank scenario, he may only get an opportunity for one pick a card, and that's the initial one he throws when he comes out of Destiny. So this is a pretty big nerf to Twisted Fate's early game, and it kind of invalidates the pick, I think, to a certain level, because his ability to shove and roam is really, really hurt by these changes. So he won't be able to influence the map as much, and because of that, it's sort of, why else do you pick Twisted Fate other than to influence the map early? I don't know how I feel about these changes. I think he did need a nerf, but I do feel like this is pretty harsh. We'll see how it plays out. Finally, onto Yuumi here. Yuumi was crushed by the E-change that gave her the percent mana cost. Even if she was proccing her passive, it just was not giving her enough mana back in order to let her continue casting zoomies. So this change here will let her both proc her passive more often, as the cooldown is down at all ranks by 2 seconds, so she'll be able to proc that more. And the mana restore now restores a smaller flat amount, but 8% of her maximum mana. So this obviously tells players what the combo is. You cast zoomies, it costs you 15% of your maximum mana, and then you hop off, you bop and block, you get back 8% of that maximum mana. So you're still losing out mana at the end of the day, but that's significantly more palatable than pressing E costs you 15% and you're going to get back a pittance in comparison. So I do like this change. I think it reinforces that Yuumi needs to be using her passive to see success, and it makes it so that skilled Yuumi players are able to benefit a lot more than the Yuumi players that just wanted to sit on someone and press E. So I do like this change. A couple final touch-ups. Ahri and Udyr have both received new VFX. Keep an eye out for those in your game. Spellthief's Edge line has been buffed, as Relic Shield was just kind of overshadowing it by being just the safer option. So now that it's giving more mana regen, you have more ability to look for pokes and to look to get your Spellthief's Edge procs. And finally, I want to talk about Nexus Blitz. It is back, and the map has a name. It is the Temple of the Lily and the Lotus. I love it, and I can't wait to play some more Nexus Blitz on live. Really looking forward to seeing that. Anyways, that's it for the patch today, guys. A lot of really interesting changes to break down, so I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know which changes you're most excited for down in the comments section below. I know I'm really looking forward to the Swain changes and to seeing Lillia on the Rift, but let me know what you guys are excited for. Thank you all so very much for watching. I appreciate it. If you enjoyed today's video, go ahead and leave a like. And if you really enjoyed today's video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days like today. Once again, thank you all so very much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.